What is up, Earth's mightiest subscribers? It's Ernie, Blerd without fear. Welcome back to the channel. Alright, in today's video, we are going to be talking about S.W.O.R.D number 4 by Al Ewing and Valerio Schiti. And in this video, we are going to learn exactly how Knull was able to infiltrate and take over Krakoa as easily as he did. And we're also going to find out exactly why the black and brown members of S.W.O.R.D are the king and black goats, and why being an Omega level mutant isn't as important as you think it is. We're gonna talk about all that and more right now, but first, let's hit that intro.
Word to wise, grass only greener when it's fertilized. Gave them truth in these songs, they prefer to lies. Destiny beautiful, adrift in her purple eyes. You can't see me, you Stevie, wondering how I reach more evolutions than Evie and make it look easy.
Okay, so when we kick this book off, we recognize that Knull has taken over Krakoa. He has literally subjugated its mutants. He has spawned symbiotes all across the island, even turning it into what he calls his own anti-Krakoa. And right now, everyone is slipped under his thrall. He has taken over everybody, and the ones who he hasn't consumed and turned into, symbiote drones of his own, he is preparing them for such a fate, with the exception of the character Eden Fezzi, aka Manifold. Manifold is, at the moment, the only mutant conscious on Krakoa. Technically, there's another, but we will get to that one in a little bit. But right now, Cable, who has been taken over by Knull and is being piloted as Knull's avatar, Knull is basically telling Manifold that there's nothing left, that there's nothing that Manifold can do, and while doing so, also kind of letting Manifold know that he's very interested in his powers. You see, Knull is able to look at Manifold and pretty much tell exactly what Manifold's capable of. He knows that Manifold is able to transport himself and fold space and time at his will, even referring to Eden as the Everywhere Man. But one thing Knull can tell about Manifold, and this is very likely based on information that he is gleaning from Cable's own mind, but he also recognizes that Manifold is not an Omega level mutant, that there is likely someone out there more powerful than him, because that is, once again, what an Omega level mutant implies. And for those who are not familiar, I know some of you who are very familiar with the channel, you're probably like, oh my god, here it goes, he's going to show us the damn page of all the Omega level mutants. Yes, I'm going to do that because this is always someone's first video. But for those of you who are not familiar with how Omega level mutants work in the Marvel Comics universe now, is that an Omega level mutant is someone whose upper limit of their power is completely unreached or untested, and more importantly, no one, human, mutant, or otherwise, has powers that even remotely compare to what this person is capable of. Hence, why a character like Magneto is considered an Omega level mutant, because no one in all of Marvel Comics has the level of ability that he has when it comes to manipulating magnetism. Well, in this case, what we're talking about is with Eden Fezzi and his ability to basically transfer and transport himself anywhere in space and time. Now, of course, I feel like what Al Ewing is setting up here, because they keep pointing this out, I feel like Al Ewing is setting up breadcrumbs over the last, this issue and the previous issue, basically letting us know that at some point down the road, we are going to be introduced to a character who is more powerful than Manifold, who can do the same things that Manifold can do, but on a greater scale. And I don't know how I feel about that, but I'm curious to see what Al Ewing's cooking up. Regardless of what Eden Fezzi's status as a mutant is, one of the things where he's going to prove why that doesn't ultimately matter is because he is able to do things with space and time other people can't. He is capable of basically communicating with space on a meaningful level. And what he does is that he opens up a gateway between Krakoa and the sun and is preparing to send Cable through it. Now, granted, it's one of those situations where, yeah, of course, he's about to kill another mutant, but I mean, of course, we also know they can bring Cable back, and if Cable is truly taken over by Knull, Cable would probably not have an issue with being killed to get rid of a greater threat. So that's the plan. Put Knull in the center of the sun, this whole thing is over. Well, at least on Krakoa, you would still have Knull out there in New York running fades on everybody. However, Knull is completely aware of an ability that Cable has thanks to his bionic arm, and that is his ability to body slide. This turns into a teleportation battle where Manifold is twisting and warping and controlling this very same portal that would lead to the center of the sun, wielding it against Knull as if it were a shield, as Knull consistently body slides, moving from space to space to space, trying to get around Manifold's portal that would lead to a death trap. Until ultimately, Knull is able to take Manifold down. But before he can do so, remember I said there was another mutant who is still conscious on the island in Knull's vicinity. Well, it just so happens that Frenzy, while trapped inside the symbiote pod, was not knocked out. In fact, she's been awake this entire time, fighting back against Knull's influence, reminding herself that she is one of the strongest people on the earth, that she is tough, that she takes no shit, that she is ready to fight and throw down at a moment's notice. And once she is capable, she rips her way out of the symbiote pod, disarms Cable, and then rips his bionic arm off of his body. And with him now being disarmed in more ways than one, he can no longer body slide because that piece of tech resides in his bionic arm. This is a moment that I really enjoyed because not only was this an awesome Frenzy moment, because, I've been talking about Frenzy for a while. I'm a huge fan of Frenzy. Love this character. I've always been a fan of her. I love this moment because it's such a callback to Age of X and some of the things we even talked about in our breakdown about the character Frenzy. I love the fact that Knull told her that I will make you kill everyone you love and beat your own children to death. And her only response is that I've only ever loved one person, and if he'd have felt the same, you would be my stepson. And I love that line because it is true. In Age of X, her and Cyclops were married, and then the fact that when that timeline was rewritten and everything reverted back to the way it was before, Frenzy still remembered the Age of X, and she still possessed those feelings for Cyclops, yet Cyclops did not possess those same feelings still. He went back to Emma Frost the way things were before Age of X began. So she has been carrying the burden of that love, that unrequited love, no less, this entire time, and I love the fact that Al Ewing went back to it and called on it, and more importantly, using it and kind of vindicating her in such a way, showing her beat the brakes off of Cable, saying that this must feel like a win for him because now she's kicking the crap out of the child, the aforementioned child that he claimed he would make her beat to death. And this all sets it up so that Manifold can come through and showcase his powers in ways that prove that being an Omega level mutant is not as important as what you can ultimately do with your power. Yes, Eden Fezzi is not an Omega level mutant. We know that. It has been definitively put out there now. Al Ewing has basically let us know in his way, Manifold is just a regular mutant. But that's not what's important. We learned in the previous issue that he doesn't teleport, that he talks to the universe, and the universe is his friend, and the universe allows him certain favors, will do things for him should he ask for it. And what he is asked for is that the universe give him a piece of the sun, wrapped in a bubble of space to where it can only hurt the people that Manifold wants to hurt. And right now, he wants to hurt Knull. And what happens is when he unleashes his sun, it does exactly what he said it would. It doesn't hurt Cable, it only hurts Knull. Cable is still very much alive, minus the bionic arm, and Manifold is the first one to point out that I've done this to you and I'm not even an Omega level mutant. Basically telling him if you ever come back, you better hope there isn't an Omega level version of himself, an Omega level mutant with his powers, because they will do even worse to him. Now, all the while that this was going on, there were some other little tidbits going on with Abigail Brand and the Five, because the Five, they didn't want to go on some runaway mission with Mentallo because his job was basically to transport them away from harm. And we do learn that the ultimate plan was to take the Five into Shi'ar space, have them take some of the more important mutants who could fight back against Knull, mutants who were maybe a part of the Quiet Council, mutants of note, and bring their DNA with them so that they could resurrect them and restart things anew, and basically abandon the Earth in the event that Earth ultimately fell. And while the Five, more specifically Hope Summers, didn't necessarily care for that plan, or at least rather, it's not so much as they hated the plan as it was being enacted at the time, that they felt that running was not the answer. And one of the situations that I think that is really important to talk about here is the fact that Abigail Brand is, yes, a mutant. She is a mutant, but she is also a person who has spent most of her life in space. She doesn't see herself as a mutant. She sees herself as a spacer, and she sees humans as humans, and she sees mutants as humans. She has a very unique perspective on this, which is why it is so interesting that she is involved with Krakoa. She sees things differently, and I think it's something that, whereas now with Krakoa, she kind of has this outside looking in perspective on Krakoa, whereas Hope has an inside looking out perspective, and right now their perspectives are not lining up. Hope sees Abigail as a kind of abandoner, someone who is not really all in with Krakoa, and that would be true. Abigail isn't, and she actually finds it very disheartening that other mutants are all in with Krakoa, that they're limiting their scope by only focusing on a nation where there's a greater universe at stake, and their place in the universe is so much smaller than what they may even realize. Hope is not going to convince Abigail to turn herself over whole hog to Krakoa, and Abigail's not going to convince Hope that she should broaden her perspective. However, in the midst of all the arguing in all this, we are going to learn that Whiz Kid has found a way to get himself teleported down to Krakoa because this was an issue. The gates were not working. Eden Fezzi was really the only way that people could travel back and forth between Krakoa because of his abilities. But Whiz Kid apparently had built a backdoor beacon to Mentalo's think tank, and he was able to transport himself down to where the Five are, which we do get to see a really interesting moment where we learn that Whiz Kid has upgraded the think tank with the ability to basically become a transformer. We see the think tank turn into an almost modified looking version of the Decepticon Shockwave, and is basically pumping out high-frequency sounds and blaring music as loud as humanly possible. And this is kind of the part where it gets a little ridiculous because, you know, they literally just got done fighting all these symbiotes, and now the Five are basically sitting here, you know, laughing and joking about, oh, let's dance, let's have some music, and Mentalo's butthurt that Whiz Kid has been, you know, messing around with his records. But what this ultimately leads to is that we learn that Cable is still reeling from the fact that he wasn't able to do the job, that he wasn't able to take care of things, that he wasn't able to basically prove himself that he is worthy, that he can be capable of making the right calls and taking the right shots when the time is needed, much like his father Cyclops can, something that has been plaguing him since Ten of Swords, and even before Ten of Swords, but more specifically, Ten of Swords really screwed up Cable's head, because ever since that moment, he realized that he is not as badass as he would like to think that he is, that his future self is often thought of as being. He lost his fight against Bay the Blood Moon, and more importantly, he was embarrassed in that fight. He was literally bent over and got his cheeks clapped sideways, and Bay the Blood Moon didn't even break a sweat. But Magneto is the one that's there to remind him that even your own father took an L in this battle. We all took a L in this battle, and that the only thing we can do is try and move on from it and try and better ourselves. What makes matters a little worse though in all this, and I think this is going to become a huge issue down the road, and maybe sooner rather than later, is that earlier in this comic, Knull killed two specific mutants, Fabian Cortez and Sunfire. Why? Because Sunfire was the one who dealt Knull a devastating blow, destroying the symbiote dragon that was attacking Krakoa, and Fabian Cortez was the one who powered him up. And he remembers that, and he gave Fabian Cortez and Sunfire their receipts, killing them both. Well, right now, what Magneto wants to do is that he wants to finish fighting off the alien invasion, getting rid of whatever symbiotes still remain on the island, and getting the Five back into business and making sure that Sunfire is pushed to the front of the resurrection protocols, and that any other mutants who have the ability to harm the symbiotes, specifically those who are like Sunfire, wielders of fire, or in other cases, wielders of light and electricity, bringing those mutants back to life so that they can get on the front lines. And more importantly, that he is going to tell the Five that once this entire King in Black business is done, he wants Fabian Cortez resurrected immediately. And this is a big mistake. Oh my god, I've talked about this since S.W.O.R.D #1 came out. We cannot forget how Fabian Cortez manipulated and used and abused Magneto back during X-Men Volume 2 in the first 20 some odd issues. Fabian Cortez had just literally turned Magneto inside out, using his abilities to basically make Magneto dependent upon them, causing Magneto to probably be one of the more problematic versions of himself in his entire publication history. And at the same time, trying to usurp power and influence from Magneto for himself, all under the guise of the Acolytes. And it is so interesting to me because we even get a letter at the end of this where Magneto is asking the Quiet Council, he is sending out a message basically saying that they are going to have a meeting about some potential amendments to the second law of mutantdom. And if you're a little sketchy on what the rules are, the second rule is murder no man. And this is what Magneto wants to talk about. Magneto wants to talk about making some amendments to that rule, because there have been some instances where they have not killed people because that is the rule. And in a lot of cases, as we've seen with the Marauders comics lately, especially the last issue of Marauders #18, we realize that them not killing humans has actually created worse problems. That these humans are now coming back as Reavers and being more dangerous than they were when they first encountered them. And I also think it's very interesting to point out that he also brings up in this note that there are right now only 8 Quiet Council members present, and that if they cannot reach a resolution, they will basically have to wait until all 12 members can be accounted for. Now, one of the things that's interesting to note here is that Marvel Girl is no longer on the Quiet Council. She has walked away. Apocalypse is no longer on the Quiet Council. He has walked away to go be with his wife Genesis and his children, the original recipe for Horsemen of the Apocalypse. We also know that Mr. Sinister is missing right now. He is in the clutches of Arcade, as well as are the rest of the Hellions. Now, the other member of the Quiet Council that is not around at the moment, I don't know who that would be. They speak as though 4 people are missing. Now, the 4th person could easily be Storm. Storm has been said to be leaving the Quiet Council at some point, or to be going on some greater, wider adventure or dealing with some other things. This could be in reference to the fact that she is helping Black Panther in regards to the things going on in Wakanda with Killmonger, who, by the way, is in league with a symbiote right now and is leading an entire war of the intergalactic empire of Wakanda versus Wakanda Prime. Maybe that is something to do with it, but I can't think of any other members off the top of my head that wouldn't be around right now, and Storm is the only one that would stick out. Well, beyond all that, he does also ask that in attendance to this meeting, he wants Fabian Cortez and 2 redacted mutants' names to be present. Now, that said, who are these redacted names? Now, one of the ones I'm thinking is probably going to be Amelia Vaught. Now, the reason I bring up Amelia Vaught's name is because in the very next page, there's an entire redacted document that has Vaught's name on it. That's the only reason why she pops up in my head. The other name that I'm thinking is probably on this list could very well possibly be Exodus. Well, the reason why I'm almost more inclined to think that the names other than Fabian Cortez are Amelia Vaught and Exodus is because they were both leaders of the Acolytes in the past alongside Fabian Cortez, all 3 of which had been leaders at some point. I don't know what Magneto is angling at, but something tells me the Acolytes might possibly get reformed, and if so, that's an even more dangerous thing than I think people may even realize. I mean, think about it. Could you imagine the idea of Magneto having his own personal team? I mean, it's not without precedent. Mr. Sinister has the Hellions, and they are specifically outfitted for dealing with missions where humans would not be present, and there would be absolutely 0 possibilities of human casualties. Imagine Magneto having a team specifically outfitted for handling missions where humans would likely die. I mean, I'm not saying that's what's gonna happen, but I could easily see it happening. But I do also want to make sure you guys recognize that we see a handwritten note from Charles Xavier basically telling him that this is a bad idea, that getting these people back in the same room is not smart. He's not saying he won't do it, but he's letting them know you are playing with fire. You are going to mess around and get burned yet again. And man, I want to believe that Magneto has grown and learned from his mistakes, but man, something tells me he hasn't learned a damn thing. Now, going back to that other redacted document, something that I think this has to do with is what we saw going on in the previous pages of S.W.O.R.D number 3 to the assassination of the Xenarch's prince Jagiar, who we saw murdered after his meeting with Manifold. Really, the only reason I even think that is largely because of the mention of Snark War and Soul, and something tells me that the Xenarchs are probably going to pull up on Earth before too long, and that Krakoa is going to be blamed for the assassination. But that said, man, I love this book. This book was fantastic. S.W.O.R.D has just been so good. It's only been 4 issues, I know. I'm trying not to be hyperbolic. I'm trying not to, try and make it seem like it's bigger than what it is. But I'm going to tell you right now, I'm sorry. S.W.O.R.D, easily my favorite book right now in all of the X titles thus far. I love what Al Ewing is doing. In every book that he touches, he always takes time to highlight a character of color and make sure that they are seen and heard and written competently, might I add. I just want to say, in Al Ewing, we trust. That said, if you enjoyed this video, Hulk smash that like button and make sure to share this video all over the internet and with all your friends so that they'll know how you leveled up your comic book big brain in regards to S.W.O.R.D and Reign of X. Also, make sure to hit that subscribe button on the way out and let me know what you thought about S.W.O.R.D number 4. Keep it plus ultra and sound off in the comments.